As some of you know, Susan and I took about 10 days for a holiday a couple of weeks ago, and most of that time was spent in California, Central California. We did spend one day in Vegas. I totally neglected to do any financial investment or planning of any kind there. But one of the big reasons we went to California, we went to Fresno, which if you think of the exotic places in California, Fresno ain't it. But, well, besides the fact that we have a couple there that we met a long time ago, and they're good friends, and we spent some time at their house, which was good. But there was another reason why we went to Fresno, and we'll show you a picture up there. Orange trees. And the picture doesn't do justice to it, but you can see some oranges hanging. Most of the oranges had been harvested by now, but not all of them. And if you know where to look, you'll see little white splashes. Those are the flowers, which is the reason why we, or maybe more specifically, I chose this time of year to go. Oranges are great, but the smell of an orange blossom, Susan doesn't think it's quite as mind-blowing as I do. I tell people I have a standing order that when I get to heaven, there's going to be an orange tree outside my bedroom window, and it's going to be blooming. It probably won't matter by the time I get there. Orange blossoms just smell so good, and in this particular time of year, you have ripe oranges hanging on the tree, but the tree is also blooming, getting ready for next year's harvest, which takes till next year this time. Let's go to the next picture. That's a picture of an orange blossom. It's not terribly big. It's actually quite small. It's the smell that's mind-blowing. And one more. Also, a picture of an orange blossom. Those pictures are not from California. Those two pictures of blossoms are from a tree that we had in our house for a few years. I think that's at least the third tree that has come to its demise in our house. I may try again sometime. This tree actually grew an orange. If you go to the next picture, there's the green orange, all inside our house. And in the next picture, there's the ripe orange. But take a look at the tree around it. Doesn't look so good anymore. So now you can go back to the black screen. Thank you. That tree had lots of flowers. It only bore one orange. Sometimes those flowers would turn into little oranges. Sometimes they even grew as big as the size of a small green pea, and they fell off over and over and over. Just one stuck and hung there for pretty well a year before, well, it fell off and then we cut it open. The tree had lots of flowers, like I said, but over time it kept losing its leaves, and then it would put out a new branch and it would be full of nice green leaves, and then it would die again. And these branches kept dying over and over and over. And we did our best to give it the care it needed. Google had all kinds of advice on what should be done. And I thought we had followed all of that advice. But the tree kept losing its leaves. And eventually the tree was just dead. Much later, I think I discovered the reason why. You think that can happen to a church? You think a church could slowly just keep on slowly losing its leaves, slowly dying, withering away. Some of you remember when this church was full of people. Lots of kids, Sunday school, children's choirs, lots of activity. Some of you don't remember that because you weren't here then. Do you think the same thing could happen to an individual, to a person who would just slowly lose any interest in God? Not just in church, but in God. Just kind of slowly dries up and the leaves fall, and eventually whatever faith there was has just died. The only purpose in looking back is, could we figure out, is there something that we did wrong? I much prefer looking to the future. It's easy to think, individually, I'd be immune to that. It would never happen to me. Or a church can say that would never happen to us. We're immune to that kind of a slow withering and wilting away kind of a death. But actually, no church is immune to that, and no person is immune to that. Some of you have friends where you would say, this is what happened to them. It just slowly drifted away until there was nothing left. Just a little more about that orange tree of ours, or mine. After it died, I left this lifeless and leafless, dry stem standing in the pot there until eventually it just got too depressing. So I picked it up, took it outside, may as well get rid of it. And once I had it outside, I just grabbed the tree itself, and I was going to see if I could just pull it out of the pot and then just get rid of the dead wood and put the dirt in the garden or something. Surprising to me, that came out of the pot really easily. The pot was about this big. We had repotted it. We had put in all the right soil and fertilizer and water and all those things. But the roots that came out of the pot, out of the dirt, were about this big around and about that tall. They were exactly the shape of the roughly 2-liter pot that it was originally grown in. It never got bigger. The roots never got bigger. The roots never spread out. Probably still my fault somehow, but I don't know how. The roots just never went anywhere. That's why the tree died. According to God's word, that's what it all comes down to. Our roots, our spiritual health, our future, the things that are accomplished, all of these things depend on our roots, not on the leaves and the flowers and whatever else is going on. It has to start with the roots. So I'm going to be reading out of Jeremiah chapter 17. If you want to follow along, you can turn there, Jeremiah chapter 17. Jeremiah uses an analogy here. He describes 2 different kinds of trees. And Jeremiah's and God's purpose is not a discussion on horticulture. He uses these trees to describe 2 different kinds of people. And I think we could use the same analogy to describe 2 different kinds of churches. Jeremiah chapter 17, and I'm going to start with the second half of the analogy. Verse 7, but blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. He will be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear when heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought and never fails to bear fruit. That's the second of those 2 analogies. Jeremiah is creating an image in the minds of his hearers and in our minds, a tree planted beside the water, green leaves, consistently bearing fruit. Verse 8, the last part. At the beginning of verse 8, he will be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream. Because its roots are near the water, it doesn't fear when the heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought. It never fails to bear fruit. A tree that does exactly what it's supposed to do. It has leaves, it bears fruit, it keeps on going even when times are tough because the roots are where they should be. The roots are near the source of water. And that's a great picture. We love that picture, a picture of vibrancy and a picture of fruit and a picture of life. How does that happen? Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. That's how it happens. If we turn back to what he's really talking about people who come into hard times, people who experience drought in their spiritual life, people who sometimes struggle. If the roots are where they belong, they will be like that tree. Then there's the alternative. Verse 5, going backwards a little bit. It's chapter 17, verse 5. This is what the Lord says. Cursed is the one who trusts in man, who depends on flesh for his strength, and whose heart turns away from the Lord. He will be like a bush in the wastelands. He will not see prosperity when it comes. He will dwell in the parched places of the desert, in a salt land where no one lives. That's the other image. Trusts in man, depends on flesh for his strength. His heart turns away from God. He's like a bush that's planted in the desert, doesn't grow. Then the other one, blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord. So the one, verse 5, trusts in man. Verse 7, blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord. Verse 5, depends on flesh for his strength. Verse 7, whose confidence is in God. Two different kinds of people. It depends on the roots. The first bush, the first man, trusts only in human strength. The second one trusts in God. In Matthew chapter 13, Jesus is telling the story, telling a parable of the sower and the seed. Maybe you're familiar with it. He talks about this farmer who's spreading the seed, and the seed falls on 4 different kinds of places. Some of the seed falls on the path. It doesn't grow. The birds come and pick it up. Some of the seed falls among rocks. Some of the seed falls among thorns. Some falls on good soil. And then verse 21 of that chapter, referring to the seed that fell among the rocks. It sprouts. It starts to grow. It doesn't last. Verse 21 says, but since he has no root, he lasts only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, he quickly falls away. It's like the roots on my orange tree. It didn't have a good root system. It didn't access the water and the nutrients that we thought we were putting in the pot where it needed to be. The tree could not survive. If we are not connected to God, personally and as a church, if we do not draw strength from God, then our spiritual life will also wither and die. Where do you draw your strength from? your personal strength. What do you depend on for security? What do we as a church depend on for security? Where do we draw our strength from? It comes down to the roots. Where are the roots situated? What kind of results do you get from roots, from good roots? Verse 8 in Jeremiah, never fails to bear fruit. What kind of fruit are we talking about spiritually? How do you measure success? How do you measure success as an individual? How do you measure success as a church? If personally, a lot of people measure success by how much money we have in the bank. That's a good, hard, solid number. How do you measure success as a church? By the number of people who attend? If that were the case, there would be an awful lot of totally anti-Christian, anti-biblical religions in the world that should be labeled as raging successes because they have lots of people. Speaking of numbers, do you know what the most common size of church in North America is? Like this. There are, and this is just a few, I pulled a bunch of numbers off of Google this week. Read a report on somebody who did a lot of work, and it's about a 4-page description, but just a little bit of it. Churches our size, averaging around 60. 9 million people in North America attend churches this size. And usually, if you're looking at church services online or whatever it happens to be, or you go visiting and you visit these big churches, 2,000 or more, and you think that's where it's really at. Of the churches that are 2,000 and more in North America, just over 4 million people attend those churches, all of them combined. Churches this size, 9 million people attend churches this size. There's a lot more churches in a lot of small communities. But quite frankly, in terms of population, it's the little churches that are doing the heavy lifting in North American Christianity. And I have a sneaking suspicion that among those thousands and thousands of churches, 177,000 churches this size, among those thousands of churches, there are people, and often pastors, who consistently feel that somehow they must be a failure because they're so small. It's not true. You don't measure success by numbers. So how do you measure success? I'm going to turn to Galatians. Galatians chapter 5, verse 22. Talks about fruit. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such there is no law. Jeremiah says this tree that's planted by the stream consistently bears fruit. The tree that's in the desert that depends on its own strength doesn't bear fruit. These are the fruits that Paul lists. Nowhere does he say huge numbers or great strength or great wealth. Think about those. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. How do you grow them? By trying really hard? You don't. An orange tree doesn't grow oranges by trying really hard. It grows oranges by having good roots. Mine was an example. How do you grow them? Just by being connected to God. One other thought about those fruits. How many of those can only be measured in community? You know, it's easy for us to say, yes, I have love, joy, peace, faithfulness, kindness, goodness. I have all of those things. Yes, I am growing the fruits of the Spirit. But if I would ask somebody else with whom I've had conflict, would they say I have self-control? Would they say I have gentleness? A lot of these, not all of them, but a lot of those fruits that Paul lists there can be measured only in community, only as you connect with other people. It's kind of how church works. Back in Jeremiah chapter 17, the tree that is planted by the stream consistently bears fruit because of where its roots are. If we here at Hague Community Church make sure that our roots are in God, then fruit will happen. A couple of years ago, I took a 2-day seminar on learning how to use some of the accessories that go with ceramic tiles. Schluter is a company that produces a lot of these accessories. Werner Schluter, who is the founder of the company in Germany, he said, he wasn't there, they just quoted him. He said, profit is not the goal of our business. Profit is the result of a job well done. If we do our job well, there will be profit, but that's not the first thing we measure. If a church does its work well, there will also be growth, probably, depending on the community it's in, but that's not the goal. The goal we work towards is these fruits of the Spirit, making sure that we are connected to God, both personally and corporately. We're often not the best judges of how well we're connected to God. Sometimes other people can judge that much better. And sometimes we're very tempted to say, yes, I am really connected. I am really where I want to be. And then I think of Psalm 139, 23 and 24, which is sometimes a hard 2 verses to read, or more accurately to pray. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. Let God be the judge of what we're bearing for fruit. Let God be the judge of whether we have our roots in the right place. We sometimes think we do, but in reality, maybe we don't. Then I'm going to read some verses out of Ephesians chapter 3, starting at verse 14. And this is my conclusion. For this reason, I kneel before the Father, from whom his whole family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the saints to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. Amen.